Hey everyone, so the RTX 3090 review is already live at this point, and now we're going to tear it down. We already tore down the RTX 3080 Founders Edition card, as you all know. A drill may or may not have been involved in that instance, but now we know better, and this one should be mostly the same process, except it's massive-er. So we're going to take a look at that, look at the construction internally, see if anything's changed with the 3090 FE versus the 3080 FE specifically because of how much larger the card is, and we'll look at the PCB as well. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Gigabyte Z490 Extreme motherboard. The Gigabyte Z490 Extreme motherboard is a high-end overclocking board built to Gigabyte's highest quality standard and tuned for memory overclocking, CPU overclocking, and system stability. The Z490 Extreme runs a densely finned heatsink for its VRMs, has RGB LEDs for flare, and uses 90-degree connectors everywhere it can to improve cable management access. Learn more at the link in the description below. Okay, so it should be mostly the same process. That is the assumption I'm going to fly under for this. To get this part off, this is the first step. This time we can treat this more almost like a tutorial rather than just a blind teardown, because I know more now. So this part just snaps in with these two snaps. Pretty straightforward. It's the same as the first one. There's a magnet right here that grabs onto a magnet hidden on the other side of the back plate. So that gets removed. First step, we're going to track this on the mod mat, which you can back order on store.gamersnexus.net. We keep selling through them. We sold through them in, I don't know, we can't keep them in stock for more than a week, it seems like, but they're on back order again on the store. Let's take out the screws. I already know where they all go at this point. The 3080 FE I've probably taken apart and reassembled no fewer than 15 times at this point, so I no longer need to track where the screws go. But maybe once we get internal, I'll need to do that. So these actually, I'm technically going a little bit out of order, but these have to come out at some point. So there's 4 Phillips screws. Then we're going to use some tape. Just duct tape, Gorilla tape, whatever. And these 4 covers right here are held in with a magnet. You can't really pry them up because they're kind of deep into the grooves. You'll see it just rips right out. So that is the way it should be done for these. Look at how easy that is. So much better than the glue recommendations. Oh, there we go. So 4 of those. And now this should be a Torx 5 or 4. 4, Torx 4. So there's 4 screws to this. I actually have a bit of a conspiracy theory about these cards and disassembling and reassembling them. Namely that just removing the back plate and putting it back on gave me issues in Furmark earlier that I can't explain and don't understand. All the thermals are fine, but it kind of behaves as if OTP is on. I never figured out what was causing that. So starting to develop conspiracy theories of NTC thermistors hidden somewhere or tamper circuits, but there's no evidence of that. I spoke with NVIDIA. They said that stuff's not in there. So it's just the ghost of Jensen sabotaging me, I guess. But it all worked after a little while. You can see the grease mark where I was working on a thermocouple, so we had one planted there, had one underneath this bracket, we had one over here. But we ended up not really being able to work too much with that data. I have not disassembled the 3090 past this state yet. So yeah, backplate comes off. You do need to pay attention to the thermal pads. You do need to try and preserve them because these are very fragile, just like the Fuji Poly type pads, any canvas style pad is. And there's memory on the back of this card. TJ Max is 110 degrees Celsius. And since there's memory on both sides, plus a hot GPU in the middle, it's pretty easy to hit that mark if you don't reassemble with all the cooling in place. One thing I was curious about was not seeing a thermal pad on the backside of the GPU. We see that sometimes on partner models, and it just wasn't here, but that may actually help a little bit with cooling down the GPU. You maybe see a difference of a degree or two, depending on the cooling on the back of the card. This should be a Torx 6, which we actually have in our own toolkit. And, oh, actually, before I completely loosen those, let me remove these. So there's 3 cables you'll have to take out. The first 2 are ribbon cables, similar to a laptop. And you have to pull up this black clip, and then you can remove them. So that's on those 2. This one you have to pull back this silver clip. Same process for the 3080. Then you can pull out the cable that's in there, but don't pull at the wire. So you have to be pretty careful with this. If we zoom on these tweezers, they are called PTO2, Engineers the brand. I love these tweezers. We bought them in Taiwan. And really fine point. So I jammed that between the pin and its housing, and that's how we're able to pop it out without pulling on the wires. I saw someone, actually kind of big thread somewhere, where people were asking, how do I turn off the LEDs right here? They didn't like the LEDs. Right now, that's the best way to do it. Disconnect it. I think there's going to be a software solution eventually. Okay, so let's unscrew each of these by about 30 to 50%, and then we'll come back through and get all of them. Here's the leaf spring retention mechanism. Really not looking forward to reassembling this because I've had a hell of a time getting the cards to behave normally after one disassembly and reassembly. They do all work, but it's really not the easiest process. They could have done this in a way that's a lot easier to reassemble. And that's not to say it's mechanically difficult. It's actually pretty simple to reassemble. It's just all the issues with the thermal pads mostly. At this point, I think I can actually flip the card up, but we're gonna just go ahead and remove these while we're at it. So there's 6 of these in the back plate, or in the I/O plate rather. Back plate's already off. Okay, that's released. So there goes that. Now we should be able to flip the card. Yes. So let me think about this. I think I want the cooler down for this. Yeah, okay. All cables are disconnected here. You can see that this thing is just kind of resting in there. The screws go through that. It's also just a light. It's got a lens on it for the light right there. So let's move all this aside. Once again, extremely dry paste. Like, really dry. Fairly even application though, so that is an upside. PCB is fairly familiar. If there are differences, we'll talk about it in a separate video in terms of the VRM. But for memory, that's the main difference. Wow, that feels like a glue almost. There's a lot of residue from the thermal pads. So memory is still Micron GDDR6X. I think they're the only ones making it right now. It is double-sided. You can see we've got 4, 8, and then 12 right there. One offset towards the bottom. Typically, this is the hot spot on cards where once it gets this close to the PCIe slot, you're close to power in, but the real problem is that you're below a hot GPU and you're sandwiched right where the air has a hard time getting out of underneath this part of the card. It gets trapped between the slot. So that's probably the hottest module on the board. It's also possible that one of these middle ones right here would be a candidate for the hot spot. But that's how I would look at it if I were going to thermally probe it further. Another note, I was talking to Jay actually earlier today, and he noted that one of these, so he had picked up his 3080, he never disassembled it, and heard a rattling, and so he took it apart. Well, he took the backplate off actually, and one of these things was loose in the card. So this is, as far as I can tell, just a guide for mounting the card. You can see these sort of the opposite end, I guess we'll call them the snap and the socket on the back plate. So that'll socket in, and that's all there is to it. But for whatever reason, he had one that was loose, and hopefully that's just an early production run issue and not a widespread thing. Because that if you pick up your card and you hear rattling and one of these is loose in there, it's metal. It can short something easily, and yeah, your card might not work after that. So keep an ear out for that. We're not sure if it's actually a real issue or not yet. While working on this earlier, I thought I had maybe seen some thermistors on the board, but NVIDIA tells me there are no thermistors on this board. I probably should have asked a wider question and said, are there any temperature probes on the board? I think the answer would still be no, though. Reasoning for that was I thought maybe the card was was following a temperature other than GPU and maybe other than memory for its behavior earlier. And so I was asking about thermistors around the board like ICX style, but we have not been able to verify if any are present, and they said there aren't any present. So that's it for the PCB for now. We'll put this aside. This, we'll check with Buildzoid on if it's any different from the other one, from the 3080. The cooler is the actual change, so significantly larger fans. Let's take a measurement of these. So this fan is about 100 to 110 millimeters. You can see right here we've got the measurement. That's measuring the outer frame of the fan. The frame is kind of like a flow guide. There's a downside where you do get reduced fin depth by, what's that, about a millimeter or so? Let's see. It's about 1.4 millimeters less distance for the fins to go. But it's supposed to be a flow guide. That said, we've noticed that the air is a pretty wide spray out the back of the card. And we show that in our photography video, our Schlieren photography video. So size is pretty large difference, where that's 110 or so. This, by same measurement approach at least, is about 85. So most marketing people would call this a 90 millimeter fan because that's how you market products. So that's about 85 to 110. And the end effect, as we show in the review, is that these fans will end up spinning faster at a higher RPM to do the same work, but the larger cooler ends up louder at a higher fan RPM because the outer edge of the fan spins faster, obviously. So that's where you see some of the difference in noise levels at the same RPM. But this one spins significantly faster at around 1900 RPM to maintain temperature target in open air, whereas this one does around 11 to 1300 for the same task. For the rest of this, you can see that it's all pretty much scaled up. I've not put on the cover back there right now, but back plate, same thing, just larger, so no surprises there. You can see, actually just lost this, this thing almost came out. These little rubber stoppers go in here for that plate that snaps in. But magnets right there that I was mentioning earlier, so that's the back plate. The cooler, let's look at fin density. So fin density looks to be mostly comparable. That's about a 1 millimeter. That's a 1 millimeter fin. And it's a little smaller. That could be variance maybe. 0.87 millimeters versus 1. I'm going to go ahead and say that might be manufacturing variance. That's 0.94. Yeah, I'm thinking these are maybe functionally the same size. Take a couple more. 1.1, 1.1, 1.0. So they're about the same size fins, and fin spacing should also be comparable. So those are actually 2.7 millimeters apart, 2.6 millimeters apart, 2.5 millimeters apart. So let's just go ahead and call that like 2.6. That's the middle. And that's 2, exactly. And that one was actually 2.4. That's 2.3. So it's about 2 to 2.3 on this set. They're about the same. That said, the surface area, much more on the 3090, clearly. And that means in the thermal testing you'll see in our review, this one takes longer to hit steady state. It takes longer to soak without the fan spinning up, and that's overall a good thing because it does mean it'll stay quieter if you have a short bursted workload, whereas the other will start working harder earlier. In terms of heat pipes internally, there are several, there's 4 large heat pipes. These are typically 4, 6, 8, or 10 millimeter. That's going to be an 8. Oh, I can't really measure. That's an 8, and that's about an 8 as well. Let's see if we can take this fan out too, just to do something extra and look at what kind of fan it is. Curious about the supplier for this. So there's just some screws in here. Would really like to see it if they could do a, NVIDIA if you're listening, pin to pad approach would be great for fans. It makes it much more user serviceable, depending on whether NVIDIA feels like that's a good thing for its business. Depends on how much it wants to be like Apple. But this is the greatest invention of all time. Got it. So there are 4 screws. Pin-to-pad approach is exactly what it sounds like. It's they're actually already doing it elsewhere. So right here, you see those pads, and then here you see the pins. It's the same thing as that, except it's more of a contact-to-contact. And this PCB is actually very thick. I just noticed. Don't know the PCB layer count. But that would make it so that the user could just socket it, maybe take out a single screw and that's it. And it would be as simple as NVIDIA sending out a fan and a guide saying remove 1 screw. And then if there's fan death later on, which is often the single highest point of failure in speaking with board partners, then the user would be able to service it. Because you don't have to do all this that I've just done to replace a fan if it's designed right. You could just get it without opening anything. So this is the ribbon cable. This actually just fished out of over here. So you would only have to take the back plate off to get to this. Technically, you'd want to go in a little further to reroute it the way it was back through all the fins. But you don't have to do that. You can just remove the back plate and then route it a little bit more sloppily. And you can take this out with just those 4 screws. But in terms of what the fan is, that is, in fact, a Delta logo. So it is a Delta Electronics fan, very well known in the industry, of course. And for the model number, it is, so it's DC brushless, and then the model is AFB 111 2HD -00. So hopefully that helps if you are replacing this fan on your own later. I'm sure you'll find it on AliExpress or something pretty quickly. The spec is 12 volts, and it is a 0.90 amp fan. There's a GP9 lettering over there too, and that should about cover it. Oh, it's nice. It's even got the rotation angle on it. So that should about cover it if you wanted to replace that. Guessing the other ribbon cable is going to be the other fan. So let's take out the other fan too. You can see just how many fins there are in there, though. It's kind of crazy. So pull this one out. Should be the same process. I'm going to track. It should be easy for me to remember because they do look different, but we're going to track which is where just so I don't accidentally mix them up, change the flow direction. Although that might be a fun experiment. Because then you'd be pulling the air in. Oh, that's the wrong screwdriver. You'd be pulling the air in through over here with the other direction. So that might be kind of amusing. Might be able to just pull this one up and then dump the screws. So this one's kind of caught. I'm gonna get the screws out so they don't fall into the cooler. And this is causing our problem right now. This ribbon cable. Have to be careful with those. I'm going to have a lot of fun putting this back in. And it's probably not worth doing what I'm doing, but we're going to see what the fan model is. So this one, I hate to say it, but the heatsink might have to come out of the housing, which is a royal pain with these. So this is where NVIDIA could have done a better job with user serviceable fans, because this is not user friendly. I think we probably want this to go towards me. Yes, we'll have to go that direction. Pretty sure the lockpicking lawyer reference didn't make it into the first cut, but I'll go ahead and make it again. This seems like the kind of thing he would be good at. This one's got a new unique problem in that it's much deeper than the 3080. It's much harder to do this. There's 3 clips you have to release, top, bottom, and then this one latches both directions. So this is the real pain. Interesting assembly. Huge pain in the ass. But also not required for like water cooling or anything like that. Why? Why would you do this? Why on earth would you design it this way? This is so stupid. Get increasingly dangerous tools to hold this close to my face. Jesus. Look at this. Look at the amount of effort that has to go into releasing this. So Andrew sort of answered my somewhat rhetorical question of why would you do this? The answer is it's easy to assemble because I can drop it in, but man, what a pain to disassemble. So we showed it before, but there's the two-directional lock. You have to shove you have to first of all hit this thing a bunch to get it to the point where it'll flex. You shove some skinny ruler in there or something, and then you've got two other clips like this on the other side that you pushed in, and then you can push the whole thing through. That is a ginormous pain to deal with. But now we can maybe remove the fan. It's glued. I found it. I found the NVIDIA glue. Can't have a card without it if you're NVIDIA. This time it is on a ribbon cable, which is in no way fragile at all. And definitely, man, I don't know if I even want to take that out. There's such high risk with that, with these ribbon cables. Really not much holding it in to begin with. A heat gun might be a little easier. Let's see if we're leaving any cable behind. No. I found where they hid the glue. Can't hide it from me. There's the NVIDIA trademark glue in a video card. Even the LN2 tank disagrees. So the fan is actually not Delta, it's ABC. That's interesting. Model is DAPA1115B2UP001. So look that strain up if you need to replace this at some point in the future. DC 12 volt and 0.60 amps for the current. It is a ball bearing fan. It's even got the direction on there. So that's the fans. That was obnoxious. Easy to remember which one goes where, fortunately, because they're different brands. There's the vapor chamber once again. There's two heat pipes here for VRM cooling. Not sure if these connect over this way. And that'll pretty much recap us for this cooler. Oh, actually, we can get the manufacture date. August 12th. This cooler was made on August 12th, 2020. Well, I don't see a date that's human legible anyway. Okay, let's clean off the GPU, because that has to be done anyway. Once again, very stuck thermal paste. And the identifier is GA102-300-A1, A1 being probably revision number, first public revision. GA102 being the die, -300 for the sub-identifier that tells us this is a 3090, not a 3080 or whatever else is in between. Roughly 23 by roughly 26. The actual die size is public, but that's the size of the packaging. Guess we'll do hole spacing too. And finally, the hole spacing for water cooling, 56.9 by, well, so 57, let's call it, maybe 56, by approximately 66 millimeters. So that'd be your hole spacing on the 3090s if you're water cooling one of these. Even the reference boards, in theory, should be the same. So that's it for the 3090 Founders Edition teardown. We have the 3080 FE on the channel as well. 3080 FTW3 teardowns coming up on the channel soon. And 3080 FE PCB analysis coming up on the channel soon. We're also going to be doing a stream later today when this video goes live, hopefully, with either air-cooled overclocking with 3090s or liquid nitrogen. Not sure yet. If we do liquid nitrogen, it won't be part of the RIP-J thing. That's going to be a different thing. And if we do air cooling, then we probably will make it part of the RIP-J thing. and do a Port Royal score or something. So that's it for this one. Check back later for more. Cooler is mostly the same. Larger fans, huge pain to replace the fans, but they could do it. It's just not necessarily something we'd want users to do, especially because reassembling these boards, preserving the thermal pads more than one reassembly is very difficult, and we've had issues with having to fix some sort of OTP somewhere in the system after reassembly. Got it all working, but it's a pain, and it's not necessarily a fun process, and this is coming from someone who's done a lot of these board assembly and disassemblies. So keep that in mind. You want to probably avoid disassembly if you can on this card, but for water cooling, obviously, that should fix most of the problems with OTP anyway, if there's any going on. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net to grab this shirt, or you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly, and we'll see you all next time.